I look at Massachusetts, I look at how we talk about ourselves, think about ourselves. We like to think of ourselves as progressive leaning. We care about things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions, like improving public health outcomes. We care about things like reducing traffic congestion so people have easier access to places. We care about social justice. These are our values, so stated, consensus values. You can't do any of those things without a fully functioning public transportation system. Not possible.
Welcome back to Spilling the Tea, the podcast where we go behind the scenes of the MBTA. And I'm your host, Andrew Cassidy. When riders talk about the T, they're usually talking about their daily experience. Is my train on time? Is my bus reliable? Is my station accessible? Those questions matter. But they're part of bigger questions about leadership, about funding, and about the overall transportation vision for Massachusetts. To speak to all of that, I'm joined today by Jim Aloisi. Jim, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us here today on Spilling the Tea.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah.
For those who might not know your impressive background, what are the roles that you've held and currently hold?
God, I'm going to go all the way back. I'll just start with the transportation stuff.
Sure.
So I was Assistant Secretary of Transportation in, I'm dating myself, the last Dukakis administration term. I was General Counsel of the Turnpike Authority for several years. I was Secretary of Transportation. I am on the Board of Directors of Transit Matters, which is one of our local transit advocacy groups. So what do I do now? I teach two courses at MIT. I teach a course in urban transportation planning and policy, and a course in cities in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. I don't think there's, frankly, another university in the country that does the kind of focused, transit-oriented research that we do at MIT, and I'm really grateful that the department and the school thinks enough about the importance of transit that they encourage us to do this.
One of the things you've said in the past that I really appreciate is transportation is not just about policy. I believe you said it's a reflection of people's values. Can you speak to what that actually means? What does that mean when you say that?
Well, it's something that sort of came to me after all of these experiences, right? And I look at Massachusetts, I look at how we collectively talk about ourselves, think about ourselves, for the most part, right? There's no unanimous. But for the most part, we like to think of ourselves as progressive leaning. We care about things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We care about things like reducing particulate matter emissions. We care about things like improving public health outcomes. We care about things like reducing traffic congestion so people have easier access to places. We care about social justice. We care about social equity. We care about regional equity. All these things we say we care about. These are our values, so stated, consensus values. You can't do any of those things without a fully functioning public transportation system. Not possible. And so I began to connect what we believe our values are with what our policies should be, right? These things must bear some relationship to one another. And so I've come to think about support for public transit really being about support for our collective values, right?
Yeah.
And I've come to believe that for a variety of reasons, I think at the national level, the poisonous political debate, and for one, that people are zoned out when you want to talk about climate change. They don't want to hear about it. If you use the words climate change, you're alienating a third or more of your audience. It's just not an effective way to message about sustainable mobility, another phrase that people zone out on, right? So in the work I'm doing, for example, at MIT, or even my advocacy, I've shifted, I've pivoted. I want to talk more about public health. You're in a room with 100 people. You say, anybody here against public health? Who's going to raise your hand? Nobody, right?
Yeah.
Anyone here want to talk about climate change? So let's talk about public health, because if I can persuade you that a highly functioning public transit and rail system will produce better public health outcomes, which it can. There's a lot of research and data on this, right? it's a much more persuasive argument than trying to get your head around greenhouse gas emissions, right? But I'm going to get the same outcome. I'm still going to reduce emissions if you allow me to invest more in public transit because you're convinced, and I've persuaded you, that it is something that will lead to better public health outcomes. I'm still going to get my climate change outcomes. I'm just not going to beat that horse up, right?
Yeah.
And so I do think it's important for those of us as advocates or those of us who are in academia, even as we get older, to not be stuck in our ways, to be able to pivot, to be able to be strategic about how we talk about these issues. And I think that's true for the T as well, right? I mean, I'm not saying the T is stuck in its ways, but you've got to have fresh and strategic ways of messaging and persuading people because the old ways won't work anymore. And you need to be, it may aggravate you that the climate change conversation has been poisoned in the public arena. That's a load of sort of ironic words to pull together, right? But I think it has to some extent. So it's like, let's be smart. Let's be smart. Let's figure out how to persuade more people that taking transit and rail will end up having outcomes that fulfill the values they say they hold.
It's interesting because the idea that reframing is what can bring more people into the conversation, understanding that maybe there are certain catchphrases, buzzwords that just immediately alienate a certain subset. Mm-hmm. But there is something, whether it be public health or something else, mm-hmm. That you could use as a central rallying point to get more people on board, because at the end of the day, they actually do agree. Right. One of the common themes that comes up on this show is how public transportation is inextricably intertwined with so many different facets that people do care about.
Right.
Creating opportunity, getting people access to be able to travel where they need to go, get opportunity for getting a job, going to school, improving public health by reducing, diesel and gas emissions, whatever that is. There's probably a way of framing it in a way that maybe a certain audience might traditionally not be receptive, but by taking a new path, taking that other road, you might be able to bring them in and get that support.
Yeah, you talk about access to opportunities and resources, and I think that's really that's why we have this the T, and that's why those of us who care about the T want it to function at a higher level, right? It is about getting people that access. How do you do that?
So fundamentally, what will it take to build a better T? And what even does that look like?
The first thing it takes to build a better T is to properly fund the T and not just on a one-off, right? And so I think right now we're preventing the T from falling into an operating crisis. We need to do better than that, right? If I were the governor, I'd be committed to investing more in transit and rail. So that means finding the revenue and the will to invest in the T so that it's both addressing aggressively state of good repair and simultaneously doing initiatives like Red Blue, like regional rail, like electric Providence line, those kinds of things. It needs to do both, and it needs the money and the capacity to do both. To Phil Eng's credit, he's focused on not just state of good repair, but he's focused on attracting good people, building internal capacity, professional capacity at the T. That's how you build a better T. That's another way to do it, right? Ultimately, building a better T is about having the money sufficient to do the chew gum and walk at the same time routine, right? And having the internal team that is able to produce in a way that that goes from how many bus drivers you have to your procurement team, to your project management team, to your planning team, right? He's building that, but you can't build something without the financial support, the structurally sound, stable, significant, ample support that still is not there yet. People may think the problem's solved. I don't think it is. So I think it ultimately comes down to money and a commitment to keep that sustained over time.
Reliable
Investment. Totally.
One of the other things that you've written about quite a bit is the need for, solid leadership and governance when it comes to the MBTA.
Yeah.
What is it missing? What does the MBTA really need? And maybe not even what is it missing, but what is the formula that could help lead to its success?
Well, if I had the easy answer to that question, all problems will be solved. All right. I think, let's talk about governance for a minute. I've often wondered, and I've wondered this particularly since I left being secretary, whether the governance structure that we have, or that New York has, or many, right, which is basically a state-run system, makes the most sense. Why do I say that? Every time the T needs a vote in the legislature for some revenue, for example, or whatever, it needs to ask some legislator from Amherst or Nantucket or Chicopee or go down the list, whose constituents don't use the T, resent the fact that they think Boston gets it right. It's and so I think it makes it harder to make the case for support when you have a state-run system. The mayor of New York wants to make bus free, but that's not his decision to make because the governor makes that decision, right? Then you go to San Francisco, city-run, different model. They have access to different revenue streams because they're city-run. These governance decisions matter in terms of, I think, the ease of getting support for the system. There's no easy answer to what the right governance structure is, but I do think people need to pause and think about whether the one that we've had for decade after decade is the right answer, or whether we can draw from examples in Chicago and San Francisco and elsewhere and come up with a better model. What would that look like? Maybe we need to have some smart people at the state level committed to thinking about that.
Fair enough. I mean, obviously, you have to take in the nuance of every locality. I know in certain locations, they have county level governments that allow for larger segments to make decisions versus Massachusetts, where everything is by municipality. Obviously, pros and cons to that in certain situations. But when it comes to public transportation, I can definitely appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah.
Speaking of the leadership piece, right now we have Phil Eng as our general manager, but he's also serving in a dual role now for several months as the interim secretary. As someone who, has been working in the state, who understands just what is involved with being a Secretary of Transportation, what is your perspective of, first, I guess, Phil and his leadership, but also what's required for both of those jobs, and maybe some opportunities that might present, but potentially some areas that might create a little bit more friction? So
I had a meeting with Phil a week or so ago. He was sitting next to me and he had 3 iPhones in front of him. I didn't say anything to him, but I thought, the poor guy, there must be like a T iPhone, a Mascot iPhone, and a personal iPhone. I'm guessing. I have no idea. So I feel badly for the guy in terms of the workload that I know he's got on his shoulders, because each of those jobs is a full-time 24/7 job. He seems to be handling it in his stride. So I give him maximum credit for that. But I think that ultimately it's not about what Phil can do, because he apparently can do it. That's not the issue. And apparently he's doing it well, so that's not the issue. The issue really is what the governor sees and wants as the structure that she's using to administer what I would say one of the most important, and biased, right? One of the most important agencies in her cabinet. And so if she's comfortable with it, then it works for as long as it works for him personally, right? I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. When it first happened, and people did in the media come to me, I said, I think it's asking a lot, because these are 24/7 jobs. Now, in fairness, I think he has, I assume he would agree, a very strong team of people at the T that I know he can rely on, people that he brought in from New York, people who have been here. So it seems to be working out reasonably well. The danger with all these jobs, and he knows this, I know it, right? You're always one event, unexpected event away from a real problem, right? Things that you could never in a million years anticipate happening can happen. And so, but that's the deal, that when you take these jobs, you take it with that understanding that you cannot control events you cannot control, right? That sounds like a ridiculous simplicity, but things happen that you would never believe would happen. And then you've just got to be smart, strategic enough to triage those things and move on.
So given that there is this alignment, at least for now, what opportunities do you see for progress that might not have existed in a previous structure? What could this potentially unlock, even if just for the short term?
Yeah. I mean, these things may be happening, and I don't know, but I think there are opportunities to have more coordinated procurement and planning, for example, and shared services that could be useful, right? I think having a keener awareness of journey patterns on the highways and what that might mean for T service delivery and potential to mode shift people. There are a lot of opportunities there that could present themselves. I mean, I think it's a hard enough job just keeping things calm, smooth, and running on a day-to-day basis. So I'm not trying to assume that people can be easily overburdened. There are only so many hours of the day. But those kinds of opportunities of shared, leveraging shared services, shared knowledge, particularly when it comes to understanding journeys and how they're being made and where the potential T service delivery modifications could come based on what you're observing on the highway side could be interesting, right? So maybe that's happening.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of look at transportation more holistically. To see the interrelation between, the people who are driving, people who are taking public transit, and I guess where those two can meet and mode shift and things of that nature can take place.
Yeah, there's one thing, now you'll allow me.
Absolutely.
If you wanted to make a case study of what might be a little interesting topic to grab onto, right? It would be, how do people get to and from Logan Airport, right? If you think about the traffic going in and out of Logan, the very confined, constrained landside roadway system at Logan.
Yeah.
Also, the T, it's the blue line and it's the silver 1 and the silver 3. The silver 1 and 3 are constrained by whatever the conditions are in the Ted Williams Tunnel. The blue is probably the better way to get people to and from Logan by transit because it doesn't have to deal with the constraints of the Ted Williams Tunnel. If it only connected to the red, I believe you would mode shift people along the what I call the knowledge corridor, from Harvard to Central Square to MIT, people who take a lot of trips to go to places, conferences, for example, and that sort of thing.
Makes sense.
Who probably Uber or Lyft to Logan. If they had that ability to connect to Charles MGH, I think it would make a big difference in getting those people to take transit to Logan. I also think it would be a boon for the largest employer in, I believe, in the city of Boston, which is Mass General, Mass Ioneer, right? A lot of workers in that large employment footprint. And there's a T station right there. We should be maximizing the way in which we can get people. This goes back to the access point. Access there. So this is my long-winded way of saying, if you wanted to study how MassDOT, Massport, and the T could combine and collaborate on one project that could have multiple downstream effects, it would be connecting the red and blue lines. So I made my pitch.
As a fellow East Bostonian, I feel very, very strongly in the same. So speaking of opportunities out there, obviously a lot of proponents for the red-blue connector. What would it actually take? How do we finally link them up?
Yeah. I mean, the overarching answer to that question is it takes political will, right? What does that mean in practice? I think I would like to see the T accelerate design to say in 18 months, I want 100% design, right? And then I want to go out. I think my own preference would be design build, right? And and make the connection between red and blue. We know that there are like a couple of issues that need to be resolved. I would hope that, like, if I could ask Phil Eng for one favor, it would be to say, tell whoever you've got on this to triage it. You want it resolved in 30 days. And if they can't resolve it, you and the mayor will resolve it. What is that issue I'm talking about? A ventilation shaft. There's been where's it going? Just decide it. Figure it out. Make it happen, right? I'm not trying to be flip. But those are the kinds of things. Getting to 100% design, figuring out where the vent shaft is going to be, right? Figuring out whether you're going to keep Bowdoin or not. I'd say there are arguments to be made on both sides. If it were me, I'd pick the lower cost argument, make that the default, right? And take it from there. It's not that complicated, right? But I would do it in a way that was beginning to get into some construction while Mass General is building the second of the new buildings on Cambridge Street, right? They're going to begin demolition of the garage, I think, in 2027. So there's some time to do some coordination. Those are the things you do to get Red Blue on track. Obviously, you need money. I think we should not be looking to federal dollars for Red Blue. I think we should sole source fund it, leverage some bond financing from the millionaire's tax, figure out a way to get it done.
Where do you think that the state as a whole has maybe zigged when it should have zagged as far as public transportation in the past? Where have there been maybe trade-offs made that maybe with that 2020 hindsight didn't quite maximize what the benefit could have been for the residents of Massachusetts?
I mean, it's hard to point to one particular thing. I think there was, when I was secretary, there was a very unfortunate, misguided narrative called reform before revenue. Reform before revenue followed another misguided narrative that was attached to the Romney years called fix it first. Now, in isolation, no one's against either of those ideas. Fix it first. Of course, you got to fix it, right? Reform before revenue. Well, I don't know. How about reform with revenue? But those narratives stuck with a lot of people and prevented, right? So it's about chewing gum and walking at the same time, to use an overworked phrase, right? You should be able, and this goes back to like what we're doing now. The T's doing an exemplary job with state of good repair, right? It's hard. It's inconveniencing people. It has to. There's no way to like magically, right? But that doesn't mean the T shouldn't be building red to blue or some other, you should be able to chew gum and walk at the same time. So these narratives like fix it first or reform before revenue, which beguile some people, or they get used by some people at the State House to defer, delay, whatever, have really, I think, caused over a period of time that lack of investment, commitment, both to state of good repair and to new initiatives that have held the T back. I mean, there's a reason why the T, when Phil Eng walked in the door, he found the T in the condition he found it in, right? It's because we've had chronic decade after decade of underinvestment, right? Both in state of good repair maintenance and in terms of new capacity like Red Blue, or what I would argue new approaches to service delivery like electrifying the regional rail system, right? You got to be able to do both. And so I think that's the big challenge now, is to persuade people that you got to be able to do both. You know, the T always struggles with its operating budget. I think at the local level, at the MBTA level, we need to get out of the fix it first, reform before revenue mindset. We need to think about the T. If I were the governor of Massachusetts, I would be saying, I want to invest more money in the MBTA over the next 10 years than I invest in highway and bridges. That doesn't mean I'm going to spend less on highway and bridges. It just means I'm going to spend more on transit and rail. What does that plan look like? Where does that get us, right? How does that offer people some real hope that when they choose to take the T, that it's a good choice? Now, let me elaborate on this. We talk a lot about, some people talk a lot about traffic congestion. We need mode shift, meaning we need to shift people from driving to transit. So let's be real about what that means. It doesn't mean getting more people to take the bus. And it doesn't mean, I don't think, for the most part, getting more people to take the subway system, right? If you're going to mode shift people at any scale, it's going to mean shifting people from driving to commuter rail or regional rail. Take your pick, whatever you want to call it, right? That's where mode shift comes from. And mode shift can't come unless you provide people with significantly frequent, reliable service. Like if you pretend you lived in the Netherlands, like that level of service, right? How do we get there? What do we need to do to make that happen? And I think that, frankly, I think the T and Keolis work well together. I think they've done a good job on what they're doing. But I think we need if we're serious about mode shift and reducing traffic congestion, the only way on the transit side to do that is to invest in true regional rail. And in my judgment, that means an electric system that has high frequencies, high levels of reliability, and so that the person who takes that service gets a call at 2 p.m. that they have to be back home because there's a parent sick, right? They don't think, holy moly, I got to wait an hour and a half. No, they know a train's going to be there every 20 minutes, right? I'm not saying this is easy to do, right? But I think it's essential if we're not going to kid ourselves, right? I love bus. I take the red line, the blue line. But that's not where mode shifts, you're not going to get mode shift there. You should have a really good, highly functioning subway and bus system. But please don't think that you're going to mode shift people. You're not at any scale, right? That comes from a regional rail system. Take transit-oriented development. We've got the MBTA Communities Act, right? So why are we building transit-oriented development? We're building it because we have a housing crisis. We want to house more people. Or are we building it to mode shift people so they'll take commuter rail? For both? If you think about TOD, if all you're doing is building density and you're not also giving people that reliable rail frequency in proximity, then you're not mode shifting anybody, right? I don't know what the transit-oriented part means at that point.
And that's the interrelation with public transportation. It's
totally,
again, it's another area, whether it be climate change or housing, it all comes back to that ability to go places. We're in the business of moving people. And if you have that reliable service and that frequency, people would be more willing to live further away, which means that affordable housing with a reasonable commute becomes accessible to even more people. And that speaks to what are our values, as you had mentioned. And it also has to deal with framing. And I think there's a dissonance right now with the framing of what money towards public transportation means.
Right.
Lots of people, I think, perceive it to be transactional, where it's, I need a ride, I'm giving you money for a ride. That is true to a point, but it's the investment component. It is, what are you going to get down the road? Again, getting away from that fix it first mentality. Obviously, yes, no one's going to disagree that things need to be safe more than anything, than reliable and all of that. But there is that need for that capital investment for things to get better. Because if you're just paying for service, you're saying, hey, the service is going down because things are getting older and things aren't being maintained. You're going to say, oh, well, it's not even worth paying for anymore. Right. Whereas if you see it as an investment, when I tap to pay my fare, it's not just to get me where I need to go today. It is an investment in better public transportation down the road. It's a step towards electrification, regional rail, and all the things that we're aspiring to do.
Yeah. I think it's important to underscore the word you keep using there, which is the right word, investment. It's an investment in ourselves. It's an investment in our future. I think too often some people think that the T is for quote unquote other people, right? It's not. It's for everybody who has the opportunity to use it, right? And we need to elevate it to a point where people see it as a choice, not just as a necessity, right?
Yep.
There are only two kinds of riders, a rider of necessity and a rider of choice, right? Some people only see the T through the lens of the rider of necessity. But what we need to do is understand, like me, there are people who choose it willingly, gladly, happily, right? I mean, I teach at MIT. I see the view from, I'm privileged because of the line I take. I see the view from the Longfellow Bridge coming and going.
One of the best.
It's stunning. It makes me feel great, energizes me. People think this guy's a little bit off his rocker, but it does. It makes me feel really good about being part of this city and region. And taking the T enables me to do that, right? That sounds like a silly thing to say, but for many people, the T can become an important part of their daily lives that uplifts them. And again, connects them to the larger society and the fabric of society that I think is just too often missed, right? So I think if we care about investing in our future, we really need to care about moving more people. It goes to the Baker administration's Future of Transportation Commission, right? We need to move more people in fewer vehicles, right?
And again, going back, it's that investment, and then to use your word, it's an investment in value.
Yes.
It's an investment in what is important to the riders and so many people in this state, and hopefully people are fighting for.
And it's value for money. By the way, no one's saying throw money away.
No.
Look at where property values are, commercial side, downtown Boston or Kendall Square. It's all around transit nodes, right? People, the agglomeration effects of having transit, whether it's a key bus route or subway stop or even commuter rail stop. And agglomeration, for anyone who wants to know, is like the clustering of economic benefits close to or in proximity to transit nodes. So if you walk around, just casually take a look at where transit stops are and what you see around you. And it's typically a clustering of different economies, small businesses, large businesses. That helps grow economies when you have these so-called agglomeration effects, right? Transit, by definition, brings access to wherever the stops are. And that access supports the thriving of a variety of different types of economies and businesses. The economic downstreams of that, the importance of that are tremendous, right? And there's plenty of data that's been out there and plenty of research on those downstream agglomeration effects. So there were real benefits to a thriving economy. There was a 2018 report that was called the Transportation Dividend that was put out by A Better City. And it showed that even though Metro Boston has a relatively higher cost of living than many similar metro areas in the country, that we have a higher productivity rate and our cost of living is reduced. Why? Because we have the public transit and rail system that we have. At MIT, I've been supervising research in Chicago and San Francisco and Seattle. You can go online and see our reports on our MIT Mobility Initiative site. We did what we called value of transit reports for each of those places. And what we found uniformly is that even in very high housing environments like San Francisco, that the cost of living for residents was reduced measurably when you had a good public transit system, right? So that's true for Metro Boston too. I know we've got a housing pricing crisis, but having a highly functional T helps reduce the cost of living for people. And we need to keep that in mind when we think about investing in ourselves, right?
What would it take from your perspective for the regional rail piece to get done?
First thing I'd like to see with regional rail is experimenting with electrification on the Providence line. It doesn't take much to do that because the Providence line has got the infrastructure already there because Amtrak runs electric locomotives, right? Let's have the T run. It could be electric locomotives. It could be another type of equipment. Let's run electric service on the Providence line. We could do that, I think, pretty quickly. Wouldn't take a matter of a couple of years. And then use that as a proof of concept, right? Think about that as a step one. And then, so I wouldn't think of Fairmount as step one. It's not big enough. The Providence line would be my step one. Step two would be to have a longer term commitment to the kinds of track improvements, like on the Worcester-Framingham line. If you need a double or triple track, we know where those spots are. We make that happen on an accelerated basis and have a commitment to running. I would like to see electric multiple units. Some would like to see battery. Let's just figure out whatever path we want to go down. and have a plan sequentially of making this happen. Right? I think that's, again, if you want true regional rail and you want to mode shift people and you want to improve frequencies, an electric system will help you get there, right? It's not the only thing, but it's a primary element of making that happen.
Makes a lot of sense. As far as getting people to come on board, there has been a gap in trust. People, over the years, many people have said, we are going to improve the system. They've heard promises that may or may not have been kept. What does the MBTA need to show? And not just say, but what does it really need to show to kind of get people back on board to help them realize the value of their investment and get them re-energized? And again, I know this is, pre-track improvement program and post-track improvement program, vastly different. I think we earned some positive public favor and well-deservingly because so many individuals put in so much work to make it better. But obviously there's been years, if not decades for some people, and they're not quite sure if to, cross the threshold on really going all in and believing in us. What do we need to show?
Well, I don't know that it's one thing that you need to show, right? First things first, I think the state of good repair work, the fact that we don't have slow zones, that's all been good. So the T has shown people that it can turn around. I was on the Boston Public Radio a week or so ago, and there was a poll that Mass Inc. did that said a larger number of people than people anticipated weren't giving the T high marks. And the host of the show said, gee, we're all surprised at this. Phil Eng is the most popular guy in the state when it comes to political leaders. And everyone thought the T was on the right track. But this poll is saying some people, and I said, well, there's a difference between the narrative and the lived experience, right? So yes, the T's come a long way. But when people still have to deal with, the red line shut down for a week because we're doing this, it tends to demoralize some people, right? And again, this is no one's fault. Well, this is someone's fault, but it's not Phil Eng's fault. When you can't get new red line cars in as quickly as you'd like, then old cars are going to break down on you. And then they do with frustrating reliability, right? But what can the T do? I mean, sometimes it's little things. When Tom Glynn was a general manager, I think one thing that they did to great effect, they went on a special effort to clean stations, like power wash them and improve the lighting and make sure the escalators were little things. Little things. I know that takes time and money, but impressions that people have of simple things like, is the station, did they power wash Broadway Station? Is it clean or is it sooty, right?
Yeah.
Is the escalator out again or in again? Is the elevator? Paying a lot of attention to those kinds of things can make people look at the T in a different way, right? It's a big job. It's an old system, and it's not a small system. So I don't take lightly what that would mean in terms of level of effort or cost. Again, there's data out there, like especially with women, things like lighting and station cleanliness have a real impact on how people perceive safety, right? It may not be the reality of safety, but it's perceptions that often matter. Those kinds of things can be helpful.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I remember there was a diversion that took place near Park Street many years ago, probably 5+ years ago now. But after the work was done, people couldn't stop complimenting us because the lighting had suddenly changed.
Yeah.
And I believe they even cleaned. There's a mosaic on the wall that shows, the origins of the MBTA and the first trolley ride. I guess inversely, what do you see that the MBTA might be doing well, but might not be getting the level of attention from your average rider?
Well, I think the T is getting, first of all, it's very obviously, to me, getting the state of good repair effort well. I think that is obvious to people. I hope it is. I think it has rebuilt a sense of trust and transparency in a way that has increased the confidence of the general public. So I think it's gotten that right. I think experimenting with, I know that there's the effort on the Fairmount line and other places to begin to introduce new power systems.
Yep.
I think that's a way to show people some movement in the right direction. So there's a lot that the T's gotten right, I think, in those respects. I think the T's done a really admirable job working with advocates and listening and being responsive to advocates in a variety of ways.
How do you assess where the MBTA is today from a financial perspective?
The first, and I guess the most obvious one, is congestion pricing or some type of road pricing, right? We have to understand a couple of things. One, it's going to take a longer time than people expect, but we are moving away from fossil fuels to electric power. Even when we have fossil fuels, cars are more and more fuel efficient. So the power of the gas tax is diminishing over time. It needs to have a replacement, number one. Number two, New York has proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that congestion pricing works well. It reduces traffic congestion. It mode shifts people to transit. It raises revenue. It does all the beneficial things that people thought it would do, right? So it's not theoretical. It was never theoretical because they've done this in London, they've done, right? But it's no longer theoretical even in the United States. We've got to have an earnest conversation about what that looks like in Massachusetts, how to make it fair, but how to make it work. And for me, that is a primary future, hopefully not too far distant, future revenue source to invest in public transportation, right? So that's number one. Number two, we've got to confront the impact and the externalities of our technology society that is introducing not just ride hailing and home delivery on steroids, but will soon deliver autonomous mobility. Each of these is imposing a burden and an externality on our city streets, on wear and tear of the infrastructure, on particulate matter emissions. It's not greenhouse gas, maybe carbon, but it's certainly PM 2.5, which is a threat to public health. We're not assessing, charging, taxing those services the way we should, based on the negative impacts that they impose on the curb, on the finite streetscape. That's another revenue source. It's not as robust or as deep as congestion pricing will be, but we're leaving a lot on the table when we fall in line with Uber and Lyft and Waymo lobbyists on Beacon Hill, to put it candidly, right? We need to assess them for their negative impacts and then use that money to invest in public transportation. So I would say congestion pricing, transportation technology pricing, and eventually parking pricing, those three things really need to be, I'm not saying any of these things are easy to do. They're not. We've got to understand what works and what doesn't work. If they're able to do it in New York, we should be able to do it here, right? And there's no reason not to politically, unless people think that New York didn't work out, but it did work out. The governor of New York is not any less popular because she ended up supporting congestion pricing. So I would politely suggest that our State House level, that people really begin to consider these initiatives in ways that they have not to date. And that's the future of transit funding, in my humble opinion, right?
We'll get them right on that. No, but I mean, also it again highlights that need for collaboration between state and municipal, and not just the city of Boston, but across the board, because, you know, in order for any of these things to work, you have to be in lockstep with one another.
Yes.
You know, if you're running congestion pricing, maybe that changes based off of if there's a diversion happening. And then obviously, you know, the municipalities themselves would be running the parking if it was, you know, street parking in their area. So there's going to have to be a lot of relationship building, to say the least.
Yeah, and look, any system that's technology based is inherently adaptable. Right? You can adapt it. You can means test it. You can time of day test it. You can do some regional equity. A lot of ways that you can make adjustments which like you can't do that with the gas tax. It's a very blunt instrument, right? But road pricing is not. Road pricing is not a blunt instrument. It's a very highly adaptable, flexible instrument that you can then use, I think, to good effect if people only understood and see it as that, as opposed to a negative, right? And too often the political discourse, it's viewed as a negative. It's much better than the gas tax for anybody, right? And if it's viewed as a replacement of the gas tax, I think people would look at it differently.
Speaking of looking at things differently, you're also, you teach over at MIT. You're dealing with the future leaders in this space. How are they preparing, and what can we do now to set the stage for them to build that better T?
I have the honor, the privilege of working with some of the smartest undergraduate and graduate students in the world who come to MIT. And what I find almost uniformly is that the students are committed to using their knowledge and their skills to really improving the world in small ways and large ways. I don't mean this in a trite way. The students I work with who are in the transportation space really want to make a difference, right? I know that the T, I won't name names, but there are several former students of mine who are about to or are already working at the T because they're committed to taking their knowledge and their talent and to put it to work for a larger good, a public good, right? Maybe the times are making them more committed, not more cynical, but more committed to building a better future, right? It's so if I can play a very, very, very small role in helping encourage and guide that, I'm twice blessed.
If you could leave both riders, decision makers, and let's say even the future leaders out there with one message, what would it be?
Never give up. Always be persistent in your belief that it's worthy to invest in public transportation as an exemplar of the kind of society we want to live in, right? Be persistent. Persistence counts. And even in the worst of times, don't give up. The idea that investment in public transportation is the right answer for the moment and the right answer for tomorrow.
I love it.
All right.
Jim, thank you so
Thanks,
much. It's been a pleasure.
I enjoyed it. Thanks, Andrew.
And that brings us to a close of another episode of Spilling the Tea. I want to thank Jim for taking the time to be on the show today and share his perspective on what it will take to build a better T. I also want to thank you, our listeners. Your feedback and questions mean so much to us. Keep them coming by sending us an email at social@mbta.com. I also want to thank the Menino Convention and Exhibition Center for hosting us in their facility to record this podcast. Until next time, I'm Andrew Cassidy, and this has been Spilling the Tea.